in which they're providing unpaid yet not paid sick time to allow these the new businesses that are small to get going.
All right, I still don't quite understand the impacts that this is going to have on the new business. At first, it looked like this was trying to do something to assist the new business when they were starting up, and now I'm not sure that it is. So explain to me how this is going to. It's just going to help them because they won't be required to pay for the sick time.
Correct.
Okay.
They're correct.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. You know, the intention was pretty clear to recognize two things. One, as we acknowledge as we're ramping up this new policy that there should be an adjustment period for businesses as is moving to this policy. You would think that there would be an analogous situation for a new business that they're going to try to, accommodate these things that normally wouldn't have had to been accommodated in the past. A small accommodation, a small consideration. And then secondarily, just the notion that businesses that start up do have burdens that are different than ones that are established. Tons of risk, particularly when you talk about a small mom and pop shop, their house might be mortgaged, margins are tight, they might be half the employment hours or them working free. I mean, there's a whole different situation when you're a new business for the first 18 months. Oftentimes it's called the walk through the desert. And we're just acknowledging that that's a real situation and we're going to try to do some modest accommodation of that. So, of course, when things get languaged and worded and modified, it does become a little more obscure, but that was the simple intent.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name should not be on this amendment.
Okay. The clerk can take care of that.
Yes, I would like to move my name off of that amendment, please.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe this isn't necessary. I was going to take another stab at kind of explaining the approach to this, which was that you could sort of think about it as we are treating new businesses in their first 12 months of operation the same way we're treating businesses with 6 and under employees, which is that they must allow their employees to take unpaid time off. But for that first year, they're not required to provide paid sick time. And then after their first year of operation, then they are. And then overall, after 5 years, we'll assume that businesses that are starting up in the city know about our paid sick requirements. They'll just become part of the planning for starting a new business. And by then it will have been 6 years from now, basically. So I hope that helps. I could also help answer any other questions.
Okay. Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Councilmember Bender explained everything I wanted to say.
Okay. So just double checking. I think we're concluded with discussion. I'm not seeing any more discussion. Councilmember Fry, you wanted to comment again?
Thank you, Councilmember Gwittlin. And Councilmember Cano, just to be clear, the reason your name is on this particular ordinance amendment is because you had asked about being one of the authors for the work that I've done on retaliation, which applies to section 40.20, which is also in this particular section. Either way works. Okay.
Did you want to say something, Councilmember Cano?
Thank you.
Okay.
This is language that I have not seen before today, the portion in section C. So I am very supportive of protections against retaliation, but the way this is packaged, I'm not able to support it right now.
Okay. All right.
Whatever.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to have my name put on this.
Okay.
I will say that most small businesses in the initial startup phase fail. And we know this from the work that we do at CPED. And to grant a modest accommodation to small businesses in their startup phase seems like something we're saying that's positive about small businesses starting in our city. I'm happy to have my name on this, and I don't want my name on much of this, but I would have it on this.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to have my name added as well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So just knowing we might have a couple different votes. Councilmember Fry, would you mind if I just called the vote separately on paragraph B and then paragraph C? So on paragraph B, Councilmember Fry has moved that. All in approval. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that item is approved. On 40.90C, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that is approved as well. Okay.
Thank you, Council Vice President. The only remaining item is amending section 40.30, the first of which applies to the calendar year. And calendar year shall mean a regular and consecutive 12-month period is determined by an employer and may be based on an employee's employment anniversary date. This is not a substantive change in any way, but it allows for the continued use of whatever year, whether it starts in January or March or July for that matter, that is presently used. And then the second is to define chain establishment, which pertains to the amendment that we just passed.
Okay. Discussion on this.
Okay, and I apologize. It's actually amending section 40.40 as opposed to 30, since there have been some changes.
Thank you. These are amendments to 40.40. Discussion on Councilmember Fry's motion. Seeing none, on approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And those items are approved. Councilmember Fry, anything more?
Madam Chair, I just have the remaining staff direction, but I figure maybe I'll
Bring it later.
breathe and somebody else can go, and then I can talk about that later.
Okay. All right. So next we have Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there are a couple versions of the amendment I'd like to bring. So I just ask that folks use the one that's listed on pages 25, 26, and 27. I think that's
25, 26, and 27.
prepared by the clerk in a very clear way. So this is three motions,
Just
which
a moment here.
are on page 25, 26, and 27.
Okay.
These three motions together address the issue of casual workers in the healthcare industry, and it's taking a different approach to this policy decision than was in the original draft ordinance. So this would delete the definition of casual employee from section 40.40. I'd like to do this because the definition of casual employee doesn't exist in other laws. And so it didn't seem like a necessary step to take in order to address the concern, which will be addressed in the third motion. This also would remove from the definition of employee in section 40.40 the exemption for healthcare providers who are casual employees. And then the final motion is what kind of adds back in the language that we want to use to clarify that folks who are calling in for last minute shifts or who are on call are not covered for paid sick time. But those casual employees in the healthcare sector who are scheduled with their regular shifts, we had some folks come and testify about this situation. Folks who maybe nurses who work 30 hours a week, they are just classified in a different job classification, but are getting scheduled for shifts along with the regular employees. So I could read this, which would add a new subsection H to section 40.220. A healthcare provider may only use sick and safe time when the healthcare provider has been scheduled to work. A healthcare provider has not been scheduled to work for shifts for which the healthcare provider chooses to call in and request a shift occurring within 24 hours, or for shifts for which the healthcare provider has only been asked to remain available or on call, unless the healthcare provider has been asked to remain on the employer's premises. So I'll move those three items, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Councilmember Bender has moved to delete the definition of casual employee from 4.40, amend the definition of employee in section 4.40, and add a new subsection H to section 40.220 as she has described. And we have discussion on this motion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Initially, I was very concerned about this, but it's been explained to me in a very detailed way by Councilmember Fry, and I appreciate the way Councilmember Bender has approached this, and I am going to support this amendment. And I really think you were very thoughtful about how to figure out what the concern was without opening us up to a whole other category of employers, so I appreciate it.
Councilmember Gordon.
I'm also very supportive of this, and actually had an amendment that was doing some of the same things, and I just wanted, there will be an amendment coming that deals with the prevailing wage issue. But I don't think I'll amend these three motions right now. I'll wait and bring that back later. Does that make sense? And but I'm very supportive of this. I actually wasn't sure we needed that extra section H, but I understand that this kind of clarifies it. I think there'll be lots of instances where we can have workers that are trying to trick the system or outsmart it, but at least by defining this here, I think then we avoid what I think was a very risky proposition of adding something called a casual employee that isn't really a recognized definition, except in one particular industry, and would be a special carve-out. So I appreciate the way you've dealt with this, and I actually suspect that the nurses who expressed concerns about this will be happy with this resolution. And also, I think some of the hospital administrators who also came in talking about this might see this as a good fit. So I appreciate the extra effort that you put into this.
Councilmember Frye.
I apologize, Madam Chair. What I was going to say has been said.
Okay. All right. I've put myself in queue here. When I first saw the draft ordinance, this was one item that I had flagged as hoping that it got some work, that I was concerned that as it was in there originally would create some issues of unfairness between industries who have really some similar practices. But and then if you kind of continue down that road, I mean, who does the ordinance apply to? So I really appreciate that some thought was put into this to try to address what was identified as an issue in the workplace partnership group meetings, but try to make that kind of narrow enough that it made sense, it's meaningful, but it's not creating, I think, these big holes and potential for really creating some unfairness in how different industries perceive that this ordinance is going to apply to them. So I want to say thank you to Councilmember Bender for trying to look for something that was a solution. And I think this is definitely an approach that I can support. So thank you. Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As people know, I've struggled with this issue. And I think this is actually a good solution to provide rather than seeing it go away entirely, to provide some guidance and some help for the hospital industry, which in all the years that I worked in that, I hadn't thought about it in the way that people portrayed it to me in discussions with employers about being essentially almost as in the category of public safety, where they have to staff up when like public health emergencies happen, when there's a flu epidemic. Hospital censuses can go from, an average of 350 people up to 550 people, just to accommodate the people that need to be in the hospital. And so they have that unique need. But again, like Councilmember Glidden pointed out too, we also have industries that need big numbers of people at times, including hospitality. So I think this is a reasonable solution. I thank Councilmember Bender for working on this, and I hope that as implementation happens, if it's an issue, we'll hear about it.
Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Bender for her leadership on this issue, especially in our hospital environments. I think about all the folks with compromised immune systems and who are struggling to recover themselves. And when a nurse comes in sick, it can be devastating and downright dangerous. And so this is absolutely important. Our nurses deserve all the same protections as all the rest of our workers, and I'm very glad for this amendment. Thank you, Councilmember Bender.
Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. And now I remember what I was going to say. A huge thank you to both Council Members Bender, the author, as well as Council President Johnson for their work on this. I mean, this is what I actually feel that the end product is far better than any of the pieces that came prior, and it's because we were able to work together on this one. And I think it's really emblematic of a lot of what's happening right now with this entire ordinance. So huge thank you to both of you. Yeah.
Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also supportive of the motion by Councilmember Bender. As someone who has a lot of the hospitals in his ward, I think this is a good resolution, and I thank her for her work.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to take this opportunity in this discussion because we're going to move away from healthcare. But for years, I was represented by the Minnesota Nurses Association. And I will tell you that part of the whole discussion about trying to meet people's needs at the bottom end of the economic spectrum, Minnesota Nurses Association has been one of the most positive contributors to the union movement for a profession that's dominated by women. But they have provided for an excellent working environment, excellent contracts for their employees, and it's a great profession. And I really attribute it very, very much to the Nurses Association. So I thank you for your input on this.
All right. I am not seeing further discussion. Any other comment? Not seeing any. So on Councilmember Bender's motion, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am bringing forward an amendment. I'd like to move this amendment on page 21. My colleague a second to get to it, and then I'd like to speak to that amendment. Then this specifically is just changing the language from requiring documentation at 3 or more consecutive days to requiring or allowing the request of documentation at more than 3 consecutive days. And the intent behind this is a lot of people, including myself, usually take about 72 hours to get over a cold or the flu and to get beyond our symptoms. And when you're just about to get over the hump with that, to be compelled to go out in oftentimes a stressful way, because when you're sick, you just want to stay at home and rest and drink fluids, but to be compelled to have to go out to the doctor and face potentially the financial stress, depending on your healthcare plan, of having to pay and wait in line and expose others on public transit and such to your illness. It doesn't seem to be in line with the intent of the ordinance, which is really keep people at home when they're sick, make sure they get better and get back to work quickly. So hopefully this can be supported by the body.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Discussion on Councilmember Johnson's motion. I'm not seeing any, so all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am going to be referring to page 16 in the ordinance. I will go ahead and pass out my updated amendment. There you go. There you go. So this amendment is in regards to section G, which I know we've already made some changes to, and so this reflects the new adopted language. So the addition is reads, but in no case shall the employee be compensated at a rate less than the rate required in Minnesota Statute 177.24, subdivision 1B. So the issue here is that we want to ensure that it is clear and documented that the paid sick time that folks would be getting compensated for would be at the level that the employee was scheduled to earn, but never less than the state minimum wage. So it's enacting a floor for that payment.
So I'm going to put myself in queue, and I might ask Ms. Trammell, and I don't know if you had an opportunity to review this with Ms. Trammell, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I don't have that statute section right in front of me, but I know that for youth and training and some really narrow special circumstances, there's a little bit different wage required than the state minimum wage, and is that incorporated in this statutory section? I just want to make sure we're not like inadvertently not allowing what's allowed under state law in general, and maybe there's another way to say it under state law, you know, something a little bit more general. I don't know. I'm seeing this right now, and so I'm asking the question. Sure.
Vice President Glidden, Councilmember Kano, I saw this during the meeting here. I've pulled it up, and it is under the Minnesota Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's the provision that is related to the payment of minimum wages. And subdivision 1B relates to the minimums. So it has minimum rates for large employers, minimum rates for small employers, and exceptions for those who are under the age of 20 during the first 90 consecutive days of employment. And then it has a different definition and minimum wage for those who fall underneath the definition of an employer who is a hotel or motel, a lodging establishment, or a resort. And then different payment for those who are under the age of 18.
Okay. So this seems to be the general provision that incorporates all the variations that exist in state law for how you pay whatever is that minimum wage for those particular workers. Okay. All right. That was only my question. So
my recommendation, though, would be to just refer to the entire section 177.24.
Okay.
Because later, as it goes on into other subdivisions, there are the referring of sharing of gratuities and other gratuity. There's just other things in there, and I think it's better to just include the whole.
So maybe that's a question to Councilmember Cano, if she's amenable to stopping the amendment at Minnesota Statutes 177.24.
Yes, the city attorney, Susan Siegel, and I just had a brief discussion, and that sounds like the good way to go. So we'll go with that change.
Okay. All right. And then Councilmember Cano, did you want to comment? I just had a question and I answered that. Was the question answered? Okay. Councilmember Frey.
I'll discuss it. Thank you, Madam Vice President. For all intents and purposes, this amendment, which I support, does two different things. One, it prevents the amount of paid sick time to be less than the minimum wage. But two, it also explicitly says that the paid sick time is not to be inclusive of things like commissions, Christmas gifts, bonuses, etc. So this is it's a clarifying point that I think functions well.
Okay. All right. I'm not seeing further discussion on this. So on approval, and that's been moved by Councilmember Cano with the slight change that she identified. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My motion is on page 28, and I think this is the final version. We had a couple of versions running that we were passing on to the clerk. But this is the final version, and it basically, it's not touching the main ordinance, it's not watering it down. This is just an addition to it. And this addition is to support small businesses. And I'll read the motion, which says, Warsame moves to direct the City Coordinator Office in collaboration with the Department of Civil Rights and Community Planning and Economic Development to develop a proposal for the creation of a small business compliance program focused on supporting small businesses as they work towards compliance with the new workplace regulation ordinance. The program and its personnel should focus on technical issues, technical assistance, and administrative resources for small businesses up to 15 employees. The program should be capable of providing support for the city's diverse small business and new immigrant communities. Staff are directed to report back to the Committee of the Whole by September 21st, 2016, with a program proposal and to include additional funding requests to account for the program in the 2017 budget proposal. I move this motion, and I would like to speak on it as well. Thank you.
You may go ahead, Councilmember Warsame.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. And the reason I brought this motion is, after speaking to so many small businesses with regards to some of the fear that they had about the workplace regulation. And the main fear was that they weren't aware of it. They weren't, there wasn't enough, input on their behalf. And this actually would help small businesses implement the workforce regulation. And some of the biggest problems that immigrant businesses have, just like, the businesses in Mercado Central, Kuruhlo restaurant on Lake Street, some of these small businesses that were just started up by, entrepreneurial immigrants, is issues with compliance. They're not good with paperwork. They don't understand all these regulations from the state level to the city. And this would help them. This would basically, support them. We will hold their hand. We will, help them with paperwork. We would make sure that they are in full compliance. And it would also help businesses even under 6 employees that want to provide sick pay to their employees. Because if the city is going to, support them and make sure that they follow all the steps and they're in compliance, I think we make everybody's life easier. And I would like my colleagues to support this. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Warsame has moved this direction to staff. Is there a discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any.
Bender.
I am sorry. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just briefly say, I think this is a great idea. We've heard a lot of feedback both from the partnership group as well as businesses I know within our own wards across the city about ways that we can better support our businesses, particularly our small immigrant-owned and new businesses. And I think there's a lot of ideas about how to do that. I think it makes sense to bring this now since it's specifically related to the implementation of this policy. But I think it's part of a package of many things that are being considered by the mayor's office and council members to better support our business community.
Thank you. Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, echoing Councilmember Bender's sentiment, and thank you, Councilmember Warsame. I think it's an excellent staff direction. I think it will help a lot of people.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I too just wanted to commend Councilmember Warsame on this. I think the immigrant community is in need of help on this particular kind of issue and regulation, and the city isn't served by a policy that employers don't understand. I think it's important to remember that immigrants start more businesses in the city than any other group of people. So to me, this makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Warsame, I wonder if you would consider a friendly amendment to your motion to add the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department to the list of departments, just because I know they have multilingual staff and they're really well connected with the community, and I think they would be helpful in engaging our small businesses, but also helping our city departments to better align our multicultural resources to help bolster and strengthen this effort.
I'm fine with that. The more, the merrier.
Okay.
I have no issue with it. Thank you.
All right. And I put myself in queue just to say I really appreciate this motion by Councilmember Warsame. We have heard a lot of desire for assistance on how to think through implementation. I know this idea around the small business support, whether that's an actual office or what are the programmatic supports, has been something that's been talked about in multiple places. And so this is kind of putting some action to something that relates to this implementation of this ordinance. I will say too, I've had small businesses approach me with ideas, offering, I would love to mentor another small business and help them think through. So I think there's ideas as well within the business community itself, and this will, I think, help us harness some of those ideas and use that to move forward. So I'm not seeing any further comment on this. All in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And my amendment in the packet is on page 22, and it's been changed a little bit. However, this has to do with the definition of an employee and some of the exemptions. And actually, my intention is to move those items that have to do with the prevailing wage into the section 40.220, which is the use of sick and safe time. And rather than making those construction workers who are being paid a prevailing wage or the apprenticeships exempt as employees, they would be employees, but by complying with the prevailing wage laws, they would be seen as also complying with our ordinance. And essentially, with previous the fact that we took out the healthcare providers who are casual employees already would just mean the only employee that would not be included would be independent contractors, so that could just move into that paragraph of the definition. I did send to council members and the clerks a slight modification. This was based on an amendment we already approved of Bender's when we were talking about prevailing wage, rather than just saying paying the prevailing wage rate. I noticed that she had written at least the prevailing wage rate, and I think, of course, we want to allow people to pay more. So I wanted to add that language that would we'd be creating a new H under 4220. It would say an employer may opt to satisfy the requirements of this chapter for construction industry employees by 1, paying at least the prevailing wage as defined by Minnesota statutes, and 2, paying at least the required rate established in a registered apprenticeship agreement. And then you can see at the ending paragraph says an employer electing this option shall be deemed in compliance with this chapter for construction industry employees who receive either the prevailing wage rate or the rate required in the applicable apprenticeship agreement, regardless of whether the employees are working on private or public projects. So I'm happy to have questions.
Okay, so Councilmember Gordon has moved changes to section 4.40 definitions and 4.220. Is there discussion on his motion? I'm not seeing any, so all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'm looking to address in your packet pages 23 and 24 on use of sick and safe time. The first is actually a minor change I think I need to make because that term has been changed. On page 23 of your packets, under section 40.220, section A added the term accrued sick and safe time, and I think that we've changed that. And I'd look to our Assistant City Attorney to give me a nod as to whether or not we still need that language in there given prior amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Trammell. I know we've had some differing language, so thank you, Councilmember Palmisano, for inviting her up.
Vice President Glidden and Councilmember Palmisano, I don't think you need that word accrued in there.
Thank you.
Either way is fine, but I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. So I would just remove that piece, but on page 24, this adds a new section. You may recall my questions and concern voiced last time to the Assistant City Attorney about how employees can use this to care for a child whose school or place of care was closed in number 5 in terms of limiting exposure to infectious agents, biological toxins, or hazardous materials or other public health emergencies. To me, one of the most compelling reasons to attempt a municipal level ordinance like this would be to be able to care for family that cannot adequately care for themselves and to be able to use this accrued sick and safe time for this purpose. So I am suggesting the amendment of number 6, which basically says that when schools are closed or daycares are closed, that would be an appropriate reason why somebody, a parent, has an immediate need that they can't control and they need to stay home to care for that family member. So I submit that for your consideration.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Discussion on her motion. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if Councilmember Palmisano would be willing to, and I think we actually have a second amendment that your office provided with this change, be willing to swap out the word child or family member. And so this would, and the reason why for my colleagues, so they understand, is that with an increasingly aging population, there's a lot of individuals who will need to care for dependent adults in their life, whether that's parents or grandparents or siblings. And this expands the definition beyond child to incorporate those individuals and their ability to care for those family members in cases of their place of care being closed due to these circumstances.
Councilmember Palmisano.
So I accept Councilmember Johnson's amendment. I did intend to have that wrapped up in this ordinance, but I do need to philosophically point out that item number 5 was really more because it was about a health concern, and it was under the idea that our city's health commissioner would be closing certain places due to health concerns, and this is a departure from that philosophy as it is being highlighted, that this is about the need for a parent to care for a family member or a person to care for a family member who has an unmet, put upon them need.
Okay. So Councilmember Palmisano has slightly modified her motion. Okay, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I thought we were doing this to help people stay home when they're sick. This sounds to me like it's now saying we're going to have paid family leave, family medical leave. That would be a reason to be able to take off too. So that would seem to me to be a substantial change in what we were suggesting we were doing. All of the stories that people got up and told were about how they were sick and couldn't go to work. I do think family leave is a whole totally different thing and something I strongly support, but I would think you'd have to have a new ordinance introduction in order to take up family leave or paid family medical leave or inflicting paid family and medical leave on businesses in Minneapolis. And if we were looking for the state to come in and preempt, this might be the reason they would.
All right, Councilmember Gordon.
I thought that this was also for other reasons that somebody would have to leave. We've had a lot of discussions about I have to take somebody to their appointment. There's a funeral in my family. So I always thought our intention was to expand it a little bit beyond just for the illness of the worker. So I guess I disagree a little bit with Councilmember Goodman's interpretation of it and think that this seems like a reasonable accommodation. You don't want somebody to lose their job or lose their pay because they can't take care of their family member when they're in some time of crisis and can't be cared for.
So I've put myself in queue here. I just wanted to make sure I'm kind of clarifying a little bit about this ordinance from my perspective and from looking at the use section, and then it's up to Councilmember Palmisano what she wants her motion to be. But already this is an ordinance that anticipates that care of a family member for the defined reasons is something that you're able to do. What's the difference is that this is about short-term kind of issues. You know, this is why we are talking about, you know, a day here, a day there, and the ultimate, you know, amount that you could is this accrual cap if something a little bit more significant would happen. But family leave anticipates a longer-term care issue and would need a much different type of proposal than we have here, which is about short-term needs to care for yourself or for a family member. So just with that clarification, I want to say I think we're within kind of this general purpose. I know Councilmember Palmisano is tweaking that a little bit, and up to her how she wants to continue to move forward. Councilmember Palmisano is next in queue.
Council Vice President, yes, as you recall, there was a story by a mom whose kid was sick, and by staying home, she lost her job. The ordinance, like you mentioned, already uses this to address caring for a family member. This item in the ordinance immediately above suggests the same thing. It just expands on it. So this just expands on number 5, in my opinion, but I know people don't necessarily agree.
All right, so again, Councilmember Palmisano has made her motion, I think tweaked it a little bit, and that is what is before us. Discussion on that, any further discussion? Not seeing any, so all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. This is a final staff direction, and it applies to a specific kind of policy, and you should have this in front of you. This is not in your packet, but you should have it. It's titled Frye Staff Direction.
Councilmember Frye, I just want to make sure folks have a chance to make sure they have. It wasn't in your packet, right? It's something separate.
Correct. It's not in my packet. It's a separate piece of paper.
Separate piece of paper.
I got it.
I'm not sure that I
Madam
have
Chair,
it.
the Frye staff directive was in the second grouped documents that we sent you. So when you sat down, there was a packet of information stapled with an index on top to all the reference page numbers referring to amendments the clerk's office had received. We then passed out a second set of amendments we received after 11 o'clock this morning that were clipped. That included the Frye staff directive. We do have extra copies if we need to pass them out.
All right, so it looks like folks have it. Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. So this staff direction applies to an instance that we were not able to, that was not ready for prime time, yet certainly needs to be covered within the ordinance, which is acknowledging the presence of policies that are use it or lose it. In other words, they go beyond the minimum amounts required by our annual accrual in our ordinance. Yet, if you don't use that time by the end of the year, you'll lose it.